the tornado got a little bit more personalized for me when I found out that Robert had lived on 20th Street, and 20th Street was, flattened.
And Robert was a student of yours.
Robert was a graduate student in our program, and so when I talked with him, he said, there's nothing, Dr. Carmack, there's nothing. And I said, listen, let me see if I could get a group together just to come there and see what we can do to help you. So it was really focused on Robert and going to his house. And so that was the day after. And so it was very difficult to get in there. And so that was another kind of catch for me. I had done Hurricane Katrina, Katrina and Rita. I was the mental health assessor for Fort Chaffee. So we had, 4,000 came in from the Superdome. And so I was a part of that disaster relief. I took a 60-day leave from John Brown in 2005 to do that disaster.
Yeah,
I was there every day. And and so doing debriefings, teaching people to do debriefings, etc. So I knew a little bit about natural disasters, having had that experience with Katrina. And in fact, let me show it to you here real quick. So I was also quite aware that getting in there is going to be a problem. We're going the very next day. And so because of Katrina, I knew, so basically this is my medical, blue is for medical and mental. And so I was in the Medical Reserve Corps at Fort Chaffee with Katrina. So I brought my vest. My vest got me into Robert's house to where 20th Street. So not too many could get in and out, but because I had the Medical Corps vest from Katrina, I was actually able to go to Robert's house.
Wow. So you've mentioned a number of things that I want to ask about. Let's just kind of summarize where we are right now, and then I just want to ask some questions about it. So the tornado takes place on May 22nd, 2011, and your student, you said it is John? No, Robert. Robert is your student. And you're in contact with him pretty much immediately?
Yes.
Does he call you, or do you call him?
No, I got a hold of him, and after I found out, he contacted someone else that contacted me. Okay. And then I got a hold of him and said, Robert, I understand you were right in the center. You're at ground zero of this, and yes. And I said, can I grab a couple of faculty, students, come and we'll try to help you sort through whatever you have. And he goes, oh, yes,
So you went up, I'm sorry, so you went up the next morning then?
Yes.
So just walk us through that process. You're
okay.
You're getting to Joplin and what you see as you're making your way to Robert's house. What the first thing that comes to mind, the interaction you have with whoever it was who let you pass because you had the vest, all of that?
Yeah. Actually, no one attempted to stop us. And I just anticipated that there would probably be blocks. And so we didn't get stopped. We went straight, met Robert, and it was kind of hard to maneuver because not all your street signs were up, that kind of thing. Everything was down. And so we were kind of given directions. I was asking, how do I get to this place? And so Robert walked us through his disaster site. The students that were with me and faculty, a couple of faculty were with me. And so then we decided to start walking a little bit of the area just to look at the disaster in that area. Robert had given us a couple of stories. The child across the street was blown out of a window out of their home. They're looking for him. They still could not find him.
Wow.
And so as we were walking, there were some people in trucks that were just bringing water, if you want water, et cetera. And so I violated rule number one of any disaster recovery attempts, which was I was so in a state of shock with what I was seeing in front of my own eyes were seeing from each step that we never took water and we never took snacks. And so all of us walked a good block all the way almost up to the hospital that was still standing, Freeman, I believe it's called. And the one right across the street was St. Joe's. It was completely demolished, but Freeman was still standing. So we walked and kept getting offers. So we were there most of the day. But we never drank any water. We never ate anything. And that's what happens in disaster. Whether you're working as a recovery person, as a therapist, as a contractor, as someone in search and rescue, trying to find people, is they sometimes fail to continue to get nourishment. And so part of the Red Cross's go and the part of our go in terms of the training that we have had in critical incident debriefings is to make sure they are getting the basics and they don't turn them down. But it was a mark for me that, oh my goodness, I've already violated rule number one, and that is we've turned everything down. And so part of that is a little bit of you're in a state of shock with your senses and what you're seeing. And I think the second part is you just can't believe what you're seeing.
What sort of things, did you see? You heard the story about the young child or the babysitter who'd been pulled out of the window and they still couldn't find it. What other sort of things did you see? Did you see people milling around? I mean, the condition of Robert's house. What are the memories you have as you reflect?
Yes, people were going through their own things. I remember seeing devastation and then one closet sticking up in the middle of nothing else, no trees, just the root of the tree was up, but nothing, no limbs, grown trees, no houses. But then occasionally you would run across one closet that wasn't touched and it still had children's clothes on hangers. And it was just by itself. Wow. So it wasn't touched. And so that was somewhat just astonishing, the things that were still there and not even blown out, and trucks were completely missing and lives were completely missing. So I heard a few of those stories. On the very next day or first day, we actually they had already started to take the gymnasium, I believe, of one of the college, and started actually putting cots up. So they were trying to get people into those arenas and get all their names, etc. And all we did was kind of I just said, no therapy. This is not therapy. It's just hand holding. Here, listen to them. Go hold some hands, listen to them. Try to provide them some hope and make sure that they're taking the water and all that kind of thing that's needed. So it was full. It was bed after bed after bed after bed. I'm not sure how many were stacked in there, but we did a lot of aisle walking in between those beds and trying to. So I heard different stories. One about my son was in my truck and we were driving. We were trying to get away from this, and the next thing I know, my son is sucked out of the window and gone, and then my truck is turned over, that kind of thing. So some stories about marriages where they had lost an elderly lady. That I continued to work with this elderly lady over time. So, but let me get back to that very first initial of arriving on site. I'll tell you why. Because I found that I couldn't think well. I couldn't think clearly, so this is in retrospect. They're going, man, I was in shock. I was in shock because my brain wasn't operating clearly. I actually went there to actually assess not only how to help Robert, but what are they going to do? What's going to be the plan here? This is one of the most astounding disasters I've seen, that kind of thing. And so, and so when I got back from that day, that very first day, we kind of thought about taking care of him, some things we could do to help him. Wow. So that was a personal person that we knew. The rest of it was just the mass of hurt and loss. They were all sort of lumped together. And so when I came back, I thought, I was trained in critical incident debriefings, had done this at Katrina, organized a mass response to Katrina at Fort Chaffee. So I came back and said, I got to figure out what we're going to do to help them. And so we created Mission Mondays, Joplin Mission Mondays. So every Monday, all summer long, I would take whoever wanted to go. And if they attended one of our trainings, so what I started doing at Fellowship Bible in Lowell, I organized, I think about 45 came to this, and I trained them in the basic disaster recovery debriefings. I taught them how to do debriefings. And then I got hooked in with Freeman Hospital. So there were 100 and something doctors, nurses, and tried to actually debrief them in sections. So I would meet with them in sections, trying to make sure that this same shock factor gave them plenty of time to talk and share their stories. Wow. And then the whole purpose of that is that it's sometimes not so much that someone doesn't have resiliency in a disaster. It's that what else has been going on in their life that this now all of a sudden this breaks their back. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking for those that were all already somewhat susceptible to potential of a suicide, potential of a breakdown, that kind of thing. And we're really looking for them when we do the debriefings. Those who talk well and talk a lot, that's medicine for us as disaster workers. They're doing what they need to do, but then there are those who that are hiding in the shadows, and we got to go talk to them one-to-one.
Let's go back to Robert real quick though. What you said, his house was there on 20th Street. So, yeah. Right in the trail of the tornado, yeah, path of it. What was his own story? Where was he when the tornado hit? And that sort of thing. Yeah,
I'll probably mess up some of the details on this, but Robert was an intern at the time, so he was doing his internship in a place that got destroyed, and it was where other therapists were working, and that's the reason we started walking. Is he wanted me to see the building that he was working in, and I believe that's where he was at the time. I think that he was seeing clients as an intern, and so, but the rest of his family, I think there were two there. He has an older son who eventually went through our program too. Eventually, after all this had occurred, that older son actually came through the program as well. But I think it was his wife and one of his daughters that was actually in the bathtub, not Robert and not his older son. I think his older son was at work. So
was the story at that house that, much of the house?
the house was gone except for a little bit of a roof over the bathtub out of the bathroom. And that was it. And he just said that's where they were. And, it was the only thing that was actually not destroyed. Everything else was rubbish. We were just kind of walking around on rubbish, and didn't know if I was in his yard. I didn't know if I was, on his concrete, from the garage. You couldn't tell, couldn't distinguish hardly anything, But Robert wanted to have, and of course, the group prayed for them, there. It was Robert, and, we all, prayed for him there. But he really was more concerned about the kid across the street.
You described yourself as being in a state of shock, right?
Yeah.
You used that word a couple times. And we know why, because what you're seeing, you're hearing this story. Robert's home is destroyed. His own family, barely made it. But as you say, he's very focused on the story about the child across the street. What happened to that child? We're probably in that realm where words just can't really, convey the idea. But when you describe yourself as being in kind of a state of shock, to use that word, I mean,
yeah.
What is going on in you that puts you into that state, if the question makes sense?
Yeah, I think, you go into this profession, 80% go into this profession because of compassion. They have a compassionate kind of nature, and so that we're helpers. And when a helper can't help, you're almost disarming us, because that's what I'm trained to do. Goal 2 really shifted pretty quickly for me. And I thought I could bring 10 clinicians with me every time, but we would then only have about the effect of seeing maybe 8 of us in one day, eight people in one day. But if I trained others in this area who live here, who went through this, to do disaster work right now or do critical incident debriefings right now, I might be able to reach, hundreds and thousands. And so I decided to use that multiplication factor. And that's where I started giving myself, by training these people to do debriefings and then taking them in. And so I was kind of the master in charge of 20 debriefings that were going on with 25 different people at the same time in various places, churches, the mental health units. They were, once again, and so I've done a lot of presentations since then, but I've got one that's called When the Treater Becomes the Treated. And so in a way, that's what happened to me, that I experienced that first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because I didn't even know what I would have to do next to be the most useful in this. It was so unbelievable. It was such a large, unbelievable disaster. And so when the treater becomes the treated, you got a problem. You got more of a problem. When first responders become, all of a sudden, they won't go home, they won't go to sleep, they won't go eat, they're going to become the treated. If someone doesn't come along and tap them on the shoulder and say, you gotta go. So one of the most strategic things I saw in Joplin was that the first responders were placed outside of Joplin. Okay. And so the first responders were all over the Superdome with Katrina, but we learned a lot from that kind of thing. We got them out of the battle zone. And so they were placed outside that little camp that's got RVs, and that was where they went and retreated. And it wasn't to keep them in ground zero. To keep them in ground zero wouldn't have given them rest. It wouldn't have enabled them to continue to become treaters.
Wow. Do you know how the story of the young child on the other side of the street from Robert's house, do you know how that story ended?
The child died, and the child was found, I think a lot further east, that kind of thing. So
Wow.
this vest has this right here. It's a notebook. I never went a day to that area without that in my, and it's simply because it's full of names, it's full of telephone numbers, it's full of resource materials that I'm giving to people, that you can call this number, that kind of thing. So lots of churches that were close to ground zero that didn't suffer very much damage. But boy, they were right on the edge of ground zero. They were trying to do everything that they could. They were the ones coming down with food and water and in the back of their trucks.
So you saw that rapid mobilization of just folks in the community. FEMA doesn't have time to get there the next day.
Yeah.
So you saw that rapid mobilization of the local churches just coming together and getting things done.
There were some in there that wanted to just know, what do we need to do? What can we do? What do we need to do? And so that was from bedding them, feeding them, praying for them, trying to help contact family members, things like that. And so I saw those trying to recover their stuff, just trying to dig through their stuff, and it was still early. There were people missing, and so they were having to have a central command to where they could go and see what was being revealed each day, that kind of thing. So it was definitely a disaster.
How would you describe the psychological state of the people looking through their stuff? Would you describe, would you apply the word shock to them, a state of resignation? Does it depend on the individual? I guess so. In just kind of the human spirit of that situation where people are digging through the rubble of their homes trying to find things.
Yeah, they, there was a calm in some where all their significant people in their lives were either injured, but they weren't killed. And so they were there trying to get valuables, things that were valuable to them. And so they were relatively calm. There might be a small flood of tears, over just hoping that they can find this particular ring or et cetera, that kind of thing. But not like loss of life, that kind of thing. And so you would see those. We were on 20th, and so we didn't go protrude into those personal houses that they lost and those personal property areas that they were theirs. We just saw them, and usually if it was like the child across the street, we didn't see anyone in the house or on that property. We only knew about it because Robert was the neighbor and Robert told us.
So I want to ask you as a counselor this question. And, I talked to a lot of combat veterans. And so, I talked to people who, lost buddies in war or family members who, lost somebody in a war. But it's something that took place decades ago. you're talking for, you mentioned a man, he was driving a truck and his son was sucked out of
Yeah.
the car. Just as a counselor, I mean, as a human being, as a counselor, what do you do? I mean, when this person is telling you this, what's your response?
Yeah, you know, I think probably principle number one is don't open your mouth very much.
Mm,
Okay, and so there becomes a time when we start to process, but in that early stage when the rubble is still there and it's not clear yet, it's really about sort of first things first for them, and first things first are the next step, the next shelter. So it's like their basic needs, those are in question. And so it's really not time to start repair work. To me, it's time sort of to practice the presence of being with them, and
yeah, so that idea of practicing the presence then, so I know it's some years back, but if you're able to bring to your mind's eye that interaction with that particular man and you hear that story, and at some point that interaction comes to an end, um, do you just acknowledge in a silent kind of way, I hear you? Is there a handshake? Is there a hug? I mean, how does that, yeah, I mean, how do you have
yeah,
this interaction and then you've been handed this story that of course
yeah,
this person is still carrying, but the interaction has to come to an end. Do you remember in your own mind how that, just the process of that interaction worked out?
yeah. I think that the there's already some, you want to know about their support system. Who are their go-to people right now. So you're trying to bring that up over the fact that when I do leave, till 10 p.m. tonight, they may have three other people that they're close to that they're going to get with, that kind of thing. So you try to, encourage them to talk, encourage them to cry, and not to sort of just, tighten your belt and say, you're going to get through this. Yeah, I'm not going to mention, but there's someone publicly came on the public waves, was a person in charge, but they said some things that I shuddered. I thought, oh gosh, why are you saying this?
Just kind of the rallying language, we're
Oh,
all
it was
in this
kind of like
together, all that sort of thing.
it's kind of like like a sergeant, um, a sergeant's orders. It is what it is, and I mean this was day one, and and so all of a sudden it's kind of that be a big boy, be a tough man,
Mm.
and so grief, is going to take on all kinds of different strides, and we just got to be careful to not impose our own way I would grieve over onto someone else. So I'm saying I, but any of us, and and so, but you're wanting to check with other supports. You're wanting to try to encourage them to talk when they need to, or write, or to cry, etc. And of course, this is our number. Call us. It's always or another resource. That's where I learned about Freeman. I learned about the mental health system in Joplin that I didn't know about until I started helping them with debriefings, and then I was able, once again, it's my little blue book. Is kind of like I've got to pull out my little blue book because I'm not going to be seeing them again, or I am. If I am, it's because I'm concerned about their next step right now. They're still a little bit too risky, in a risky place right now. So I will be checking back with you. I'll be back here tomorrow. Are you going to still be in this bunk, because they don't have another plan, et cetera. And so I'm trying to get resources to them. To me, that's kind of like when someone's in a crisis, you're having to deal with a lot of pragmatics in crisis. It's not a time for repair work. It's a time, to stabilize.
What I'm hearing as you're speaking is, I've heard other stories. A guy comes up from Texas, and he's really good at barbecuing, so that's what he does. He barbecues. Another person comes, and what he has to offer is sharpening chainsaws, and so that's what he does. Another person comes up and fixes flat tires. That's what he does. People open their homes, and you have the gift of you have the gift of counseling, you have psychological training, and that's what you bring.
Yeah.
So just to kind of sum things up, you hear about the student of yours, Robert, that connects you to Joplin. You're there the next day. And then, the question pops into your head, okay, so what do I in particular have to bring to this situation? Yeah. So you're not necessarily, good chainsaw sharpener, but you're good with the counseling. So we're going to do that. And you mentioned your Joplin Mission Mondays.
Yeah.
Where you're bringing folks up from northwestern Arkansas to
Joplin. From Siloam. Mm-hmm.
Siloam Springs.
Yeah, I took a van.
And about how many of those did you do?
All summer.
All summer of 2011.
Right after the event. It's a principle of the cross and resurrection to me. Just the same that no one was stood around that tornado that day that I walked on the scene at ground zero. I couldn't see very little good here, and would see glimpses of that one little closet with the little girl's clothes still hanging on those hangers. That was saved, that kind of thing. So it's kind of the thinking perspective, and the perspective, you don't get it all till time goes on.
On that theme of faith, did you ever feel challenged in the context of Joplin? When the destruction was just mind-boggling.
It was mind-boggling.
I mean, did you ever wonder, like, God, what in the, like, literally speaking to God, God, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
On here.
Yeah, I think that I've always felt that called, in a sense, to this. I believe that when Jesus was described as a wonderful counselor, it's not by accident. And, and that was a long, long time ago before he ever walked the earth. Mm-hmm. And so I found that to be true, that God is a much better caretaker than I ever will be. That he has much more compassion for those that hurt than I ever will. And so I think if I can kind of slip on his sandals for a little bit, that's kind of what I'd probably experience, would be walking through and firsthand sitting with those that hurt, and trying to create hope for them tomorrow, that they will have a new possibility of a new life tomorrow, that kind of thing. And so, so I really I don't really sort of question it in a sense, sovereignty, of God. I believe the sovereignty of God helps me relax a lot, knowing that even though I'm seeing a lot of disaster, knowing what's going on in this world today, God still is awake, and God still is alive, and God still has as much hurt and pain as what I do when I'm watching this go on. Sometimes it's a tragic experience that is used in such a way that I become a different person. You cannot not be changed.
How did the experience with Joplin change you?
I think maybe, I'm not sure. I know that some of the profs that I took with me out of the counseling department, one of them, just a few years later, called me up and said, "Hey, man, I just used your debriefing materials that you used back when we went to Joplin." And he goes, I thought I'd call and tell you, you need to do this."
Mm.
And so he was kind of pointing out that I think you were made for this. So I think the other thing that just personally, so the year anniversary was 2012, May 22nd, 2012. And on February the 28th of 2012, I lost a grandson. My grandson died unexpectedly. It wasn't SIDS. He was too old for SIDS. It's kind of a new syndrome. Well, Freeman was doing a year anniversary, and they were the ones kind of heading up this after a year later in Joplin. So they called me. The vice president at the hospital called me and said, "John, can you come to the year anniversary?" And so I had to, tearfully tell them, actually, I can't. I've just gone through my own tragedy. Even though it was somewhat removed, we had not even buried Tucker yet because they were doing an autopsy on him. So it took a little bit longer and that kind of thing. So friends of mine from Texas came down and stayed with us for 2 weeks and until all that. But that then caused me to miss the year anniversary with Joplin, or I would have been there at that as well. And so I would say that there are a couple of people I wouldn't mind seeing again, though. And that's kind of crossed my mind of going back to the elderly lady, see if she's still alive, see if she's still married. Going back to the chaplain that so it's kind of like a kindred. There's a bit of a kindredness, I know people, through the tragedies, that we kind of walk through a little bit together. And so there's a bit of satisfaction and joy in that, and maybe not able to still remember their names. But I think all of those experiences have kind of helped me along life's road too. I've got a close friend that's got cancer in the liver, and so he's in Texas, and we talk to each other on a regular basis. I got two friends that don't have any family members alive. So I think, in a way, all of that just kind of keeps adding to my sort of my compassion quotient. Yeah. And I think that I've actually become a better clinician, not because someone once asked me, "Are you a better clinician since you got your doctorate?" So actually, no, I'm a worse clinician since I got my doctorate in it. And so, but I think going through your own sets of grief and things like that, loss, etc., makes you a lot better clinician. So, informal training.
The phrase I have in my mind is the fellowship of suffering.
Yeah. I love the fact Jesus was a man of sorrows. And that says a lot. You know, that who would he be with? You know, who would he sit with? Who would he take his time with?
Tucker was your grandson?
Yeah, we put him down for a nap and he never woke up. Wasn't sick or anything. Anyway, the school was kind enough to, you know, we were in the middle of building a play therapy, you know, which is where now the faculty are located on the edge of the campus. And so right before you walk into the counseling suites, play therapy suites, his name's above that, Tucker Hill play therapy suites. And then in every room of the suites, I hope they're still there, but there's a emblem, kind of a memorial to Tucker that's either on the wall or on one of the desks, et cetera. That's something that was and allowed us to place in every room.
I'm reluctant to ask this question, but I hope you'll hear it in the spirit in which I intend. You mentioned this house across the street from Roberts, where the
little one.
Do you know? Did you have any idea of how old that child was who was lost in the tornado?
No, but you know, I wouldn't think that. I would say probably a young child. So, but I wasn't sure of the age.
So you have experience with disasters, and then, you know, with the case with Tucker, this family, you know, loses its young child in the tornado. You know, you describe Tucker goes to sleep and never wakes up.
Yeah.
This tornado in Joplin, you know, there was some warning, but I think for a lot of people, you know, we have warnings all the time and whatever, but this one was real. And that child, you know, goes missing, but it then is eventually found. Suppose the parents of that child, you know, stumbled across this discussion someday in the future. What would you want to say to them?
I would hope, you know, that I would hope that, because I think that there were other children in the home, and that this was, I think that if I remember this right, this was the youngest, and so I guess my thoughts is that let me just speak from myself. A year and a half later, I get a call from my daughter who lost Tucker, and Tucker was their only child at the time. And in fact, I'm driving to Little Rock, and Amy calls and says, "Dad, guess what?" And I said, "You're having twins." Mm-hmm. And she goes, "How did you know?" And I said, "I didn't know." And she goes, "I am. And they're identical twins," which then the doctor described to her how much of a miracle identicals are, and that there's still a mystery actually to us. And that twins follow in families, but not identicals. And so that they're a unique, you know, and I said, God is pretty good. I just think he's pretty cool. And she goes, "Me too." So I think perspective on that is one of the mistakes we see after the loss of a child is to have another one and you celebrate the one that was lost through that one, and then you miss who they are. You understand? And so, and that would be something probably I would just say, man, celebrate. If you're going to have any more children, celebrate those children and for who they are.